Well, hello again, friends. It's a pleasure to be with you once again for Concert Conversations as we're joined by Maestro Mark Russell Smith, the music director of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, who's joining us from his lovely home in the Twin Cities. As you can see, I just happened to pop over to Schönbrunn Palace, Maestro, as you well know,
Excellent.
where some of the music that we'll be enjoying together was probably performed a time or two.
And
Chances
chances
are.
are better for one of the pieces than the other one. I'm guessing, but
Yeah. Well, let's just dive right in. First off, it's great to be getting together in person. I think all of us who accessed the February concert via streaming were very impressed and pleased, and I think you spoke for all of us when immediately after the Mozart you said to our talented young soloist, "Bravo." And it was a wonderful treat to see. But we're going to get some people back in the Adler, and that's got to make for a change in chemistry.
very much so. I mean, we're very excited about it. Playing for live people and seeing their faces and just making that human connection. There's no substitute for it. And certainly for Masterworks One, when we had the same protocols and the same small audience, I mean, there was an incredible feeling in the hall and just gratitude on both sides of the stage. And so, I mean, the virtual concerts have been great, and we'll continue to offer live stream, of course, or recorded performances. But yeah, it'll be great to be in the hall with a live audience, no question about it.
And what great music to bring us back together for. And let's just dive right in.
Okay.
Mozart's Eine, kleine Nachtmusik. A lovely piece, but tell us a little bit about how it got on today's or this
Well,
program.
it got on the program because of the second piece, actually, because of Brahms' Serenade. And so, I mean, we'll talk about that later. The Brahms Serenade is rarely performed, and for a lot of reasons, not because it's not incredible music, but we'll discuss. But Eine kleine nachtmusik, of course, is in the hit parade in the top 10, and so it was very intentional on my part that first of all we have two serenades. We have uh, contrasting serenades, contrasting, kind of in quotation marks. Certainly there is great contrast, but Eine kleine Nachtmusik again is, along with da 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 dum. If you think dum bum 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 bum. I mean, there's certain tunes that even your non-veteran classical music enjoyers, know, and that's certainly one of them. And so interestingly, it's as seemingly ubiquitous as it is not played all that often in the concert hall, and so that adds a little bit of intrigue too. It's kind of like, oh, Eine kleine, but it's like, well, we don't play it that much in the concert hall, and so here's an opportunity to do that.
Well, and it actually it probably started quite removed from the concert hall. Before we get to that, though, let's do a little bit of music history and musicology for us. Uh, what makes a serenade as opposed to maybe a small concerto or something like that? What creates a serenade?
Well, a serenade is just a combination of movements that aren't like a symphony. A symphony has a certain, like the has a certain structure. Usually, the first movement's sonata allegro form. Then there's a contrasting slow movement. Then there's a dance, and then, so I mean, a serenade is, I think, less. I wouldn't say less serious, but I think considered by composers. Uh, I think it's not meant to be like a journey like a symphony is. It's a little more lighthearted. It's a combination of movements. A suite from the Baroque times was a series of dances, and so it kind of is the natural progression from that, because it's not all dance movements. I mean, they have sonata allegro form, they have a slow movement, they have, different aspects to it, but it's really kind of more, I think, the intent and the lightheartedness of it, or the, it's less, serious, quote unquote, than a symphony.
Well, this particular work, Maestro, what we know about it is that this was probably rumbling around in Mozart's head about the same time as he was working on Don Giovanni, which
Right.
was, of course, a much heavier, though that has its light lyrical moments too. And we don't know exactly why he wrote it. There are many, many theories, but this particular format was something that composers would do just to have something ready, I guess, right?
Precisely, precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Mozart, look, I mean, there's divertimenti, which like divertimentos, which is a kind of the same thing as serenades. I mean, Beethoven, what am I saying? Mozart wrote tons of divertimenti, which is basically party music, you know, and the serenades are party music, just a little bit different. I mean, he wrote the Hoffner Serenade. There's, you know, there are all sorts of serenades, and these really are just kind of titles that composers had. And it frankly is party music, is music for entertainment, music that maybe was played in the background for in this very place where you are right now, Schönbrunn Palace, you know. Um, who knows? And again, we don't know. But what we do know is that, you know, what a hack composer would do, you know, I mean, there was party music being written all the time. And so, you know, composers of the day were used to that, and their music, it was music for use. It wasn't, he's not writing music for the ages. But luckily, what Mozart absolutely did was transform these seemingly unimportant musical genres and then make them something, make them a statement for the ages through his talent, through his God-given ability, through his just, you know, unparalleled gifts, you know. And so a little ditty like Eine, kleine, nachtmusik, a little night music, which is like, you know, seemingly tossed off, of course, is a is a brilliant piece that's here we are talking about in 2021, you know.
Well, okay, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper here. It is a terrible tragedy that we don't think this was performed during his lifetime, right? That it probably got its premiere posthumously. Um, what is it about this work of all the stuff? Because you're right, just about everybody knows this. Even if they haven't heard it performed, they've heard it somewhere in the background, right? Is it inherently the music? Or could it also be a little bit of marketing? Because a meaning of a little night music was, we might say in the 1920s, music for pitching woo, or you know, something that would be
Right.
something different in the 2020s, right? But I think this had this sort of romantic overtone to it. Why, out of all this stuff, do we always know these melodies?
Well, I mean, that you make an excellent point. It very well could be, it had a title. I mean, you know, there are all sorts of serenades. There's the Hoffner Serenade. There are other serenades. There's divertimenti that don't have that moniker that, you know, I mean, arguably just as fine musical quality, you know. And so, you know, certainly for programming, you know, when I teach at the University of Minnesota, and one of the things I do when I teach my doctoral conductors is how to put programs together and how to think about programs. And so, you know, there are all sorts of programs about all sorts of pieces of music about night. And I mean, you name the composer and there's a night piece. There's the Moonlight Sonata. There's, you know, Sunset. I mean, you could do a whole, you could do, like we did a whole series on rivers, you know, in the Quad Cities. We could actually probably do a whole year on night music, you know.
Mm.
You know, I don't know how sellable that is, but anyway. So, you know, Eine, kleine has that durability, and it has there's always a place programmatically for it, you know, given the title. And, you know, I mean, maybe if he had named another serenade, Eine, kleine, nachtmusik, then we wouldn't be talking about this particular piece. I mean, who knows? It's just really a matter of conjecture about like why this one perseveres. Mozart's musical quality is, you know, there's not bad Mozart really. You know, there's early Mozart and there's later Mozart, and he was a different person. But like, you can't look at an early symphony and say, "Ugh, this is poor quality," you know. And so, you know, even serenades, even divertimenti, even, you know, music not meant for the concert hall per se, just has such quality and such depth. And so you combine that maybe with the idea of a little marketing push, and boom, you know, we have, was one of the top 10, no question.
Right, right. Okay, we may circle back to that a little bit, but let's get to the next part of the program, sort of the heart of the program,
Right,
which is also a serenade
right,
by Johannes Brahms.
right.
But so let's start with what are the similarities that make each a serenade, and then let's talk about the beauty of what Brahms is
Well,
saying.
I mean, it's the number of movements.
Mm-hmm.
It's 5 movements. It's um, they're dance movements. There are movement 2 and movement 4 are dance movements. The opening movement is the sonata allegro. I mean, it's a serenade. I mean, he wrote these serenades because, I mean, for a lot of reasons. One of which is, or the main one probably is Beethoven. Not because Beethoven wrote serenades, although he did. I mean, this is really modeled after Mozart. The serenades, which is one reason why I put these 2 pieces together. But of the overarching reason why Brahms wrote 2 serenades for orchestra is because he did not feel himself artistically ready to tackle the symphonic form, to make a symphony. And that's because of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. I mean, he, as a young musician, heard Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the ultimate symphony at the time, the best finale. I mean, what can you say, about Beethoven's Ninth Symphony? And so he then dove right in and started writing his symphony in the same key of D minor. But then it didn't quite go the direction he wanted it to go. Then he turned into a piano concerto. Then it turned into a piece for 2 pianos. It eventually turned out to be the first piano concerto in D minor. And so it's like this thundering, fist shaking work, but it's not a symphony. And so he just couldn't figure out in his own artistic mind how a symphony by Brahms was going to go. But he had great ideas, and he was full of tunes, and he really wanted to write for orchestra. And so when he was in Detmold, this beautiful town, which we have a history with, I personally have a history, and the Quad Cities has a history with. Anyway, one of his earliest stops in his career was Detmold, and so he wrote 2 serenades for orchestra. The first one in D, and then this one that we're playing, number 2 in A major. And it's kind of him feeling his way through the orchestra, feeling his way through larger forms, and starting to grapple with larger forms, but not being psychologically ready to write a symphony, which he didn't do till he was 40 years old. And that's kind of famous. Brahms' first symphony. Finally, he felt ready after these serenades, after concertos, after all these things. He felt artistically equipped and ready to kind of, I wouldn't say take on the mantle of Beethoven, but at least not be so intimidated by it that it, created writer's block.
Yeah, we'll come back to that piece in a little bit, but you point out something that I've always found very fascinating, and that is when you talk about Brahms, you're going to start talking about psychology at some point, right? And this weird relationship he had with women in his life. Well, I shouldn't say weird, just a distinctive sort of. There's something about his female relationships. And then you mentioned that by the time he gets around to writing his first symphony, well, by that age, Mozart was dead, but he had written 41, right?
Right.
And that's, of course, a different time, different era and all that. But Mozart seems to be sheer instinct or genius or spirit or whatever you want to say. But with Brahms, you talk about the psychology, and yet the result, having listened to this Serenade number 2, it's just beautiful music. I mean, it's really just on its own. You can sit back and just lose yourself in it. It's
Exactly.
lovely.
Exactly. I mean, and Brahms is a complicated guy, as you alluded to. Um, he was very much, of course, so he's now composing during a time where Wagner and where there are all these lists. I mean, all these composers like pushing to change things and pushing to get away from classical form and getting away from all those handcuffs that the form, the classical style, the classical expectations had presented. but Brahms didn't want that. You know, Brahms was absolutely backward looking. I mean, he looked at the music of Bach, he looked at counterpoint, he looked at passacaglias, he looked at old forms for inspiration. And what is unique about Brahms is that, I mean, he has his own voice, and his voice is informed by the past, but he also, the way he turns a tune, the way the drama with which he imbues music, the I don't know, I just how he combines the best of all these elements, it makes him absolutely a unique voice. His composition process is at once super brainy and super thought out, and there's every note is related to everything else and very highly structured. But also there's a spontaneity of tunefulness and of orchestration that comes. And so it's this great combination of heart and mind, I think, that is really appealing. It certainly appeals to me. And you know, it's fun studying a Brahms score because it's so highly structured. You can, you know, if you're a mathematician, or if you crave structure on some level, my office floor notwithstanding, you know, if you crave structure, then Brahms is the guy for you, because you sit at the piano and you see how this is related to that, and you see how Brahms uses a passacaglia form, which is a form from the Baroque and pre-Baroque, and so this romantic voice and these beautiful tunes and this lush orchestra is comes to the fore based on all the stuff that's come before. And so it's, you know, that's what gives him, I think, the great attraction, and also the kind of, it just really works well. And so there's some level of subliminal, you know, just rigor of structure that is really appealing to musicians and to audiences too.
Well, with this form, what I like about the music that you program is we really get to appreciate different elements of our ensemble with different works, right? And this being a serenade, emphasis on strings and that sort of thing, what should we, as folks who are fans of the QCSO, should be looking for in terms of the musicians that we'll be hearing, and the way that some of them will get to be a little more, I don't want to say show off, but a little more prominent in this work?
Well,
What should we be looking for?
well, it is, I mean, it's very much a wind-driven serenade. I mean, it's, you know, I mean, composers who followed him, Dvorak, you know, wrote a wind serenade for that just added a cello and a bass. And so, I mean, it's very much wind-driven. There are 10 winds, 2 flutes, actually piccolo as well, so 3, 2 oboes, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, 2 horns, no trumpets, no timpani. So you'll hear, I mean, his writing for woodwinds, which later you'll hear in the symphonies very much. I mean, it's really, you know, if you know Brahms symphonies, you hear a lot of how he writes for woodwinds and the combinations and the colors and everything already, you know, very mature. But so there's that, I mean, to hear wind solos and to hear, you know, clarinet and oboe and flute and, you know, and all those unique colors. But what is one of the most interesting aspects is that this is a piece with no violins. The string section is made up of violas, cellos, and basses. No violins. And you know, there are not a lot of pieces in the repertoire, the orchestral repertoire, that you can say, no, the violin section can have the night off for this one. I mean, it just doesn't happen very often, you know. And so what that creates is a unique sound world, you know, of dark and low. And so now the violas are basically the first violins. But of course, they don't have the range of the first violins, and they don't sound like violins, nor should they. And so we have this kind of really woody, deep, you know, dark, lush sound. And so we combine that with the woodwind colors and these dark sounds with the violas leading and then basses. And, you know, it creates a unique, fantastic sound world. And, you know, it also, you know, it's one of those silver linings about this weird situation with how we have to give concerts and how few people have to be on stage. Like, this piece is rarely performed because because there are no violins, you know, and because like, are you gonna have a concert with no violins? Well, I mean, it's not economically smart, it blah, 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 you know, so it's like, there are all sorts of reasons to not do this piece. But now there are all sorts of reasons to do this piece, you know? And so we just embrace the opportunity to explore this repertoire, which is beautiful and tuneful, but like way underplayed. Like who knew the second serenade of Brahms? Like only nerds like me, pretty much, and a bunch of violists, you know? They're the only ones probably. And so as you know, even I don't know if we've ever played it in quad, you know, you'd have to look at the program notes. I doubt it, or have we?
I'm going to look while you're chatting, so please
Okay.
keep talking about this
I mean, I'd be
remarkable piece.
surprised. It could be, you never know. I mean, with such a German, you know, traditional German orchestra, you'd think everything by Brahms was played, but it could be the premiere. I honestly don't know.
Well, we're going to keep looking while you're talking.
Okay.
I know that our good friend Caitlin has sent me all the program notes, so we'll
Okay.
get that answered before we're all done. But
Okay.
while I'm doing that, I would like to invite you to talk a little bit about Vienna. So Vienna as a city attracted these two artists, right? One, not that far away, Salzburg, though even by the time he was in his teens, he had traveled extensively, especially for that time, right? And gone around and seen lots of things before he came to Vienna. But yet Vienna set its trap for him and became his city, along with
Right.
Prague for Mozart, but mostly Vienna. And then with Brahms, a guy who grew up kind of rough and tumble neighborhoods of Hamburg, much grittier, always wanted to be very refined and Victorian, or the German equivalent of it, right? And yet when he gets to Vienna, it's like the deal is done, right? And that's where we equate Vienna with him. There's something about cities like that. I think Los Angeles might be another one that takes people from wherever and then just sort of brings them in a little bit. And then I don't know, you've got experience in Vienna. What is it about that city that attracts geniuses like Brahms and Mozart?
Well, I mean, because it was the happening place at the time. I mean, it was the center of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was, you know, it was the center of all things artistic. And, you know, I mean, Mozart came there, Beethoven, of course, from Bonn. You know, all these Germans had to come to Vienna to, you know, to establish their cred, you know, I guess. And it's certainly where the money was. It's where it was the hotbed of music and of art, because they were spending money on that. And I mean, look at the palace behind you, you know, I mean, it was a thing. Ironically, you know, of course, Vienna has been capitalizing on those glory years, you know, for the last 100 years or so. You know, Vienna hasn't really done much since then, except, you know, been a tourist, you know, been living off of that reputation for the past 100 years. But, you know, that's a separate issue. But I mean, they still have good orchestras and opera, don't get me wrong. But it's, you know, I mean, it's a mixed, and certainly the composers had mixed feelings about it. Vienna was very judgy. I mean, the audiences in Vienna, according to Mozart, you know, thought they knew a lot, but really didn't, you know, and so, and was, you know, Mozart, the genius like Mozart wasn't universally embraced and wasn't universally loved in Vienna, like he was in Prague. You know, he loved going to Prague because they celebrated him and recognized his genius. I mean, I guess Vienna was so busy with the Salieri's and the people, you know, I don't know. It's a mixed bag, Vienna, for both Brahms and Mozart. And so it's a love-hate thing. I mean, or it's a necessity thing. I mean, you kind of have to make it in Vienna if you're going to make it. Same for Beethoven, you know. But the public doesn't know quite as much as they think they know, and you know, and time, you know, I mean, time kind of bears that out. You know, Mozart was not embraced, and and it was hard for him to make a living in Vienna. You know, it was really difficult. And I mean, he had his issues with spending money and all that. But anyway, I mean, it was a place you just kind of had to go to, and you know, to establish yourself and establish your credentials, for better or for worse. And they both did it, and they both succeeded. And so therefore, of course, the city now in hindsight, like adopts them, you know, just like, you know, like, oh, we knew all along, of course, you know, but it, you know, the reality isn't quite that.
Well, and you're right. I think by the time Brahms, I think the writing was on the wall. He tried to bring, get some of the youngers like Dvorak to. He assisted them in many, many ways, but he could never get them to actually move there and spend a lot of time. However, I will say, and yeah, the backdrop does put me in mind. I can think of no better way to get ready for a concert like this than a cup of really strong coffee cut with full whipping cream, like they do on the streets of Vienna, maybe a little pastry, and away we go. In answer to your question, Maestro, this is a concert of very rarely played works. Not only is this the QCSO premiere of the Brahms Serenade, Eine, kleine, nachtmusik has only been performed once in the history of the symphony, and that was by Maestro Donald Schleicher in 2001.
Wow.
Isn't that something?
Can you imagine? 2001 was the first time. I mean, and again, people, you think of this Eine, kleine, nachtmusik as just being so ubiquitous. It's like, oh, but wow, that's very interesting. Again, it's one of those pieces that's like you just don't program because you think, oh, it's like it's hackneyed, whatever. But it's not. I mean, it's great music, and so especially now with having a live audience, I mean, what a delight. They can come in and just be embraced.
I think it'll
By
be
both
interesting.
pieces. By both pieces.
Yes, and I think it'll be interesting to be there and to watch. I think especially younger people, because you and I think we grew up in an era where things like Eine kleine, they were sampled richly. We didn't call it sampling in those days, but it was all, you bounced into it all the time.
Right.
I don't know that that's as true for maybe
right. No, I think you're right. 30. No, that's true. That's true.
So
and I mean it's such a funky concert because the violins they show up and they play one piece and then they don't play the second half. It's like weird. Like they won't know what to do with themselves, because violins are playing all the time, and they usually have the hardest parts and the most notes,
I know they never get a night off.
Wandering around without, not knowing what to do on the second half,
Maybe we could find a nice Sachertorte for them to have.
Yeah, exactly. Something. But
well, yes.
I really, I really think of Brahms as, much more German than Viennese. The Hamburg thing and Detmold, where these pieces are, where, again, we have a relationship with them. The University of Minnesota, the Quad City Symphony, we've had guests from Detmold, and it's a tiny little nothing town, but it's like, you can really understand Brahms' music and the young Brahms only if you know what that area of the world is like, and not just weather-wise, but and landscape-wise, but also just kind of how the mentality of the people and the kind of the way they live their lives. And you really understand a lot about Brahms by being in Hamburg and being in Detmold and being in that area of Germany specifically. And it's he's a creature of his surroundings, in a lot of ways, intellectually and culturally, and anyway. So I really, Vienna Brahms, I understand, but I think I think where he's from really informs what his output.
Right, and so it is important to note that this is not a Vienna piece of music necessarily. He was 27 when he premiered this, and it was in Hamburg.
Right.
That the world premiere was given to this piece. Well, we're going to wrap up here in just a moment, but thank you for traipsing with us all over the subject matter. Is there something we've missed that our audiences should be thinking about?
No, except, I very intentionally programmed 2 serenades. I knew we were going to do the Brahms Serenade, and then, well, what do we couple with it? And given all the changes we've had to make, and how Masterworks V is going to, anyway, it's all part of a grand plan, believe it or not. Even though this grand plan had to be improvised and had to be changed and shifted around, I think it's a really, I think, organic and great way. I'm thinking, of course, in the big. I'm thinking Masterworks 4, 5, and 6 together, and so this is so different than 6 is going to be, and 6 is going to be fantastic. So just to kind of sit back and relax and let 2 serenades just kind of wash over you, and you know, is going to be, I think, welcome. And now that the audience is back, I mean, to come back and to have a piece that you know and love, I think will be very welcome, and that the players, you know, look, I started playing that piece, you know, as a kid, gigging, you know, whenever in the 8th grade with, you know, whatever, with my, you know, middle school string quartet, you know. So it's, you know, everybody has a history with Eine, kleine, nachtmusik, you know, and so that's both liberating and also challenging in a way, you know. But anyway, it's just beautiful familiar music and then beautiful unfamiliar music, and so there's, you know, there's nothing not to love about it, I think. And the serenades were meant to be music like that, just to be enjoyed, and you know, you don't have to overthink anything.
Well, it may be apocryphal, but once upon a while in the 1980s, a listener of WVIK phoned in a request for Ernie Klein's night music. And so
Ernie
thank
Klein's night music.
you, bringing it back to us. Thank you, Maestro, so very much. We want to thank Chris Connolly of Wells Fargo Advisors for stalwart support of this series, making this opportunity available for all of us to get a little insight into the music we're going to hear through Concert Conversations. Maestro, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, look forward to a great concert.
Thank you so much, Kai.